June 6, 1944, 1:14 in the morning. 13,100 American paratroopers dropped into Normandy darkness, carrying 88 pounds of equipment. Chutes snapped open. Anti-aircraft fire tore through C-47s. Men hit Normandy fields scattered tens of kilometers from their objectives. They reached for their weapons. Army doctrine said the system worked. Open the Griswald bag. Pull out 3 pieces of disassembled M1 Garand. Thread the barrel. Lock the receiver. Insert the clip. 40 seconds, start to finish. Doctrine assumed paratroopers had 40 seconds. German soldiers closing through the hedgerows knew they only needed 10. In the darkness, scattered across enemy territory, American paratroopers discovered what engineering drawings never showed: the difference between a weapon that works on paper and a weapon that works when your hands are shaking and the enemy is already firing. The United States Army had exactly 12 months to fix a problem that was killing soldiers faster than enemy bullets. The solution came from the last place anyone expected. March 1942, Fort Benning, Georgia. The United States Army was training paratroopers faster than it could figure out how to arm them. On the practice drop zones, instructors watched men struggle with a problem that had no elegant solution. Each paratrooper carried nearly 40 kilos of equipment when he jumped: rations, spare clothing, entrenching tool, fragmentation grenades, Hawkins mines, gammon bombs, reserve chute, main chute, ammunition, medical supplies. Somewhere in that chaos, strapped to harnesses already overloaded, each man also carried a weapon. The M1 Garand, General Patton's greatest battle implement ever devised, was a magnificent rifle. 9.5 pounds of American steel, 43.6 inches long, chambered in .30-06 Springfield, firing a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second with enough power to kill at 500 yards. It was the best general-purpose infantry rifle in the world. It was also completely wrong for paratroopers. The solution the Army had devised was the Griswald bag, a heavy canvas sack designed to protect the precious rifle during the jump. Theory said the system worked perfectly. Clip the bag to your harness before boarding the aircraft. Exit the door at 120 miles per hour, survive the opening shock when the chute deployed, land, open the bag, remove 3 disassembled pieces of Garand, thread the barrel into the receiver, lock the action, insert an 8-round on-block clip, chamber a round, and fight. The engineering drawings showed it could be done in 40 seconds by a trained soldier under controlled conditions. Reality was different. During field exercises at Fort Benning, soldiers discovered problems the engineers had never anticipated. Slung rifles caught on brush during movement. The 43-inch length hit the backs of helmets, slid off shoulders, made it impossible to wear standard field packs. Men who jumped with Garands clipped to their harnesses, landed hard and scrambled for cover while fumbling with canvas straps and disassembled components. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Germany was demonstrating what airborne forces could accomplish. Glider-borne troops and paratroopers in lightning attacks through Belgium and the Netherlands, the capture of Fort Eben-Emael, the invasion of Crete. Every German victory proved that speed and surprise could overcome superior numbers if the attacking force had the right equipment. The United States Army Ordnance Department generated an urgent request: develop a compact, lightweight defensive weapon with greater range, accuracy, and firepower than a handgun. It needed to weigh half as much as the Thompson submachine gun or M1 rifle. It needed to be something paratroopers could actually carry into combat without breaking their backs or compromising mobility. The answer arrived in 1941, the M1 Carbine. At 5.2 pounds and 35.6 inches long, it was roughly half the weight and length of the Garand. Chambered in .30 carbine 7.62 by 33 millimeters, it fired a 110-grain bullet at 1990 feet per second with 967 foot-pounds of energy. That was roughly twice as powerful as the Thompson's 45 ACP, with far better range and accuracy. The effective range was 300 yards, adequate for the close-range fighting paratroopers expected behind enemy lines. For paratroopers, it seemed perfect, light enough to jump with, powerful enough to fight with. The 15-round detachable box magazine meant more sustained firepower than the Garand's 8-round clip. Production ramped up immediately. More than 6 million M1 carbines would eventually be manufactured, more than any other United States military small arm of World War II. But there was still a problem. Even at 35.6 inches, the M1 Carbine was too long for safe parachute operations. Paratroopers needed something that could be strapped tight to the body during the violent exit from a C-47, survive the opening shock, and this was the critical part, be ready to fire within seconds of landing. Not 40 seconds, not even 20 seconds, immediately. In early 1942, United States Army Ordnance issued a new request for submissions: design a carbine with a folding or collapsible stock. The stakes were enormous. America was building airborne divisions at breakneck speed. The 82nd and 101st Airborne were already training for combat operations that everyone knew were coming. Europe was burning. The Pacific Theater was in chaos. Every week without a solution was another week paratroopers would jump into combat with improvised, inadequate weapons. Every training jump at Fort Benning was a reminder that the current system did not work. 3 companies submitted designs. 2 were rejected as unacceptable. The Army did not explain why. There was no time for explanations. The 3rd submission came from an unlikely source: Inland Manufacturing Division of General Motors in Dayton, Ohio. The company had started in 1922 making wood-wrapped steering wheels for automobiles, operating out of the former Dayton Wright Airplane Company factory. 20 years later, they had become one of the largest producers of the M1 Carbine. By the war's end, Inland would manufacture 2.6 million carbines, 43% of all M1 carbines produced during World War II. They were automotive engineers, not gunsmiths. They thought in terms of mass production, field reliability, and abuse tolerance. They designed for the 10,000th unit under worst conditions, not the first unit under laboratory perfection. Inland submitted their first drawings in March 1942. The Army reviewed them and wanted revisions. Time was running out. The 82nd Airborne Division was already scheduled for deployment. Intelligence reports suggested major airborne operations were being planned for North Africa, Sicily, perhaps even France. The weapon needed to be ready. On April 29, 1942, Inland's revised drawings were recommended for standardization as the Model M1A1. On May 12, 1942, the design was officially approved. They had 6 months to prove it would work in combat, or watch paratroopers die carrying the wrong weapon into the most important battles of the war. What Inland's engineers understood, and what set them apart from traditional gunsmiths, was this: the solution did not need to be revolutionary. It just needed to work, every time, under the worst possible conditions. The Inland design was simply a side-folding stock that any carbine action could be placed into, replacing the full-length wooden stock of the Model M1 Carbine. A wooden pistol grip provided the grip surface. A spring-loaded wire buttstock folded to the left side of the weapon. When folded, the overall length measured 25 inches. When deployed, 35.6 inches, identical to the standard M1 Carbine. The weight remained 5.2 pounds. The critical innovation was what the design did not include: a locking mechanism. The stock was not locked in either the open or closed position. Instead, it was held in place by a spring-loaded cam. Some engineers at Army Ordnance worried this was a weakness. Inland knew it was a feature. A lock mechanism meant moving parts, potential failure points, precious seconds wasted fumbling with latches or releases while under fire. The spring-loaded cam was instant, intuitive, foolproof. A paratrooper could snap the stock open with one hand in the dark without thinking about it. No buttons to press, no levers to manipulate. Just push the stock until the cam engaged. The design assumed soldiers would be exhausted, scattered, possibly injured, definitely terrified, and it worked anyway. This was automotive thinking applied to small arms. Inland's engineers had spent 20 years designing car door hinges, hood latches, steering column assemblies. They understood that mechanisms needed to work for the average operator under stress, not just for skilled technicians in controlled environments. They designed for the 10,000th paratrooper on the 10,000th jump, not the first prototype in a laboratory. Inland subcontracted the specialized work. S.E. Overton Company of South Haven, Michigan, supplied the wooden components. pistol grips machined using furniture-making techniques adapted for wartime production. Royal Typewriters, Incorporated of Hartford, Connecticut, produced the wire buttstock and initially handled stock assembly. This was not precision gunsmithing. It was automotive-scale manufacturing translated to weapons production. The rivets holding the stock together were automotive brake shoe rivets, proven components with known failure rates and stress tolerances. The leather cheek rest on the wire stock used techniques borrowed directly from car upholstery, cutting, stitching, and attachment methods that had been refined over decades of automobile production. Every component was selected for its ability to be mass-produced, field repaired if necessary, and abused without catastrophic failure. Royal Typewriters initially experienced problems with the assembly process. The details were never publicly documented, but production delays in mid-1942 threatened the entire timeline. Eventually, S.E. Overton assumed full assembly responsibilities and began shipping finished folding stocks directly to Inland's Dayton facility. This was not ego-driven competition between contractors. It was institutional flexibility serving the mission. When Royal could not deliver, Overton stepped in without bureaucratic delay. At the Inland facility in Dayton, the assembly process was brutally simple. Complete M1 Carbine actions, the receiver, barrel, bolt, trigger assembly, everything that made the weapon function, were removed from the standard production line and placed into M1A1 folding stocks instead of regular M1 stocks. The action was identical. The operating mechanism was identical. The only difference was the stock. Serial numbers were whatever Inland serial numbers reached the folding stock assembly point at the time the stock was added. There was no separate serial number sequence for the M1A1. It was not treated as a new weapon system requiring independent tracking. It was the same proven M1 Carbine action in a different package. A package designed specifically for paratroopers who needed compactness without sacrificing reliability. This approach had enormous implications for logistics, training, and maintenance. Armorers already trained on the M1 Carbine could service the M101 without additional instruction. Spare parts were interchangeable. Ammunition was identical. The only specialized component was the folding stock itself, and even that could be replaced with a standard stock in the field if necessary. Deliveries began in October 1942 to the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. The first production run totaled approximately 71,000 M1A1 Carbines, shipped between October 1942 and October 1943. The weapons arrived with specialized accessories designed specifically for airborne operations. The jump scabbard was a padded canvas holster that attached to the paratrooper's pistol belt at the top. A leg strap at the bottom could theoretically be secured around the paratrooper's ankle, holding the weapon snug against the leg during the jump. It was essentially an oversized holster for the M101 with its stock folded, 25 inches of firepower wrapped in protective canvas. The leg strap was almost never used. Reports from field training and early combat operations indicated it could cause serious injury upon landing, including broken legs when the weapon's weight and momentum transferred through the strap at the moment of impact with the ground. The physics were brutal. 88 pounds of equipment plus body weight hitting Earth at roughly 20 feet per second, with a 5-pound weapon strapped to the ankle acting as a concentrated point of force. Paratroopers quickly improvised better solutions. Many tucked the folded carbine behind their emergency parachute, securing it with the existing harness straps. Others developed methods to carry it across their chest or back, dispensing with the jump scabbard altogether. The Army did not officially authorize these modifications, but it did not stop them either. Combat has a way of selecting for what actually works. The weapon worked. The spring-loaded cam held through opening shock. The folding stock deployed instantly upon landing. The same M1 Carbine action that had proven reliable in standard configuration continued to function in the airborne package. But working in training was not the same as working in combat. The real test was still coming. The M101 Carbine saw its first combat use during the airborne assault on Sicily in July 1943. American paratroopers, scattered across the Sicilian countryside in darkness, found themselves in exactly the situation Army Ordnance had feared when they first requested a folding stock carbine 15 months earlier. Isolated, surrounded, needing to fight immediately upon landing. The M1A1 performed. No fumbling with disassembled components. No 40-second reassembly process. Paratroopers landed, snapped the stock open, chambered around, and engaged German and Italian forces within seconds. The spring-loaded cam held. The wire buttstock did not collapse under recoil. The weapon functioned exactly as Inland's automotive engineers had designed it to function, simply, reliably, every time. Sicily validated the concept, but the real test was still coming. June 6, 1944. Approximately 13,100 American paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions boarded C-47 aircraft for the largest airborne operation in history. The 101st would drop 6,928 men. The 82nd's mission, codenamed Boston, would bring 6,420 paratroopers carried by 369 C-47s. With their T-5 parachutes and nearly 40 kilos of equipment, they took off shortly before midnight on June 5th. By 1:14 in the morning on June 6th, they were jumping into Normandy. Problems began immediately. Encountering a cloud bank over the Cotentin Peninsula, pilots climbed or dove to avoid collision. German anti-aircraft fire further dispersed the fleet. The drops were catastrophically scattered. Paratroopers who were supposed to land in tight groups found themselves alone in Norman fields, sometimes tens of kilometers from their objectives. Men carried more than 60 pounds of equipment attached with tie-downs that had seemed adequate during training but failed under combat conditions. Griswald bags tore loose. Ammunition pouches vanished. Fragmentation grenades and Hawkins mines disappeared into the darkness. Paratroopers ran through fields behind enemy lines trying to find their drop bags and weapons on the landing zones, all while German patrols closed in. But those who landed with M1A1 carbines tucked behind their reserve chutes or secured to their harnesses had an immediate advantage. Their weapons were ready, not in 40 seconds, not after fumbling with canvas bags and threaded barrels. Immediately. At Brecourt Manor, Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, led a now famous assault on German howitzer positions that were shelling Utah Beach. His men used M1A1 carbines to take precision shots from elevated positions in the hedgerows, suppressing German crews while flanking teams moved into assault range. The lighter weight of the carbine allowed faster movement through the bocage terrain. The 15-round magazine meant sustained fire without reloading. Photographic evidence from D-Day shows M1A1 carbines were not confined to the drop zones. They appeared on the invasion beaches themselves. One photograph from Omaha Beach captured a soldier from the 16th Infantry Regiment taking shelter at the base of chalk cliffs, cleaning sand from his M101's action. The weapon had somehow made it from an airborne unit through the chaos of the landings to a regular infantry soldier who recognized its value. Weapons migrated to where they were most useful, regardless of official allocation. The numbers from D-Day tell the cost. In all, 2,499 American paratroopers became casualties. In the 82nd Airborne alone, 15 of the 16 battalion commanders were killed or wounded. The losses were severe. The scattering was worse than anyone had anticipated, and the German response was more organized than intelligence had predicted. But the losses would have been catastrophic without the M1A1. Every paratrooper who landed with a weapon ready to fire instead of a disassembled rifle stuffed in a canvas bag had measurably better odds of survival in those first critical seconds after landing. The difference between life and death often came down to who could return fire first. Consider the mathematics. Paratroopers were scattered tens of kilometers from their objectives, isolated behind enemy lines, facing German units with superior defensive positions and often superior firepower. The M1 Carbine's effective range of 300 yards was adequate for the close-range fighting that dominated the Norman hedgerows. The lighter weight allowed faster movement through the bocage terrain that characterized Normandy, endless small fields divided by ancient earthen banks topped with thick hedgerows, perfect for ambushes and close-range engagements. In this environment, the seconds saved by having an immediately functional weapon often made the difference between reaching cover and being cut down in the open. German soldiers who encountered scattered American paratroopers in the hours after the drop reported surprise at how quickly the Americans could establish defensive positions and return fire. The Germans expected confusion and panic from isolated soldiers. Instead, they encountered organized resistance from men who landed with working weapons. The M1A1 Carbine was used in every subsequent American airborne operation of World War II. Operation Market Garden in September 1944, the attempt to capture bridges across the Rhine through the Netherlands. Operation Varsity in March 1945, the airborne assault across the Rhine into Germany itself. Every time American paratroopers jumped into combat, many of them carried M101 carbines, and every time, the simple folding stock design worked exactly as Inland's engineers had intended. The weapon had proven itself in combat under the worst possible conditions: scattered drops, night operations, flooded fields, dense hedgerow country, urban combat, every environment that could challenge a firearm's reliability, mud, water, sand, extreme shock during landing, the M1A1 encountered and survived. The spring-loaded cam never failed. The wire buttstock never collapsed. The simplicity that some engineers had questioned turned out to be the design's greatest strength. There were no complex mechanisms to break, no fragile components to fail, nothing that could go wrong between landing and firing. The second production run kicked off in April 1944, producing approximately 69,000 more M1A1 carbines through December 1944. Combat experience from Sicily and Normandy had validated every design decision Inland's engineers had made. No modifications were necessary, no improvements were requested. The weapon worked, so production continued. By the end of manufacturing, 140,591 M1A1 carbines had been produced. Every single one was built by Inland Division of General Motors. This made the M101 unusual in the context of World War II weapons production. It was common for successful firearms to be manufactured by multiple contractors. The M1 Garand was produced by Springfield Armory, Winchester, Harrington and Richardson, and International Harvester. The standard M1 Carbine was manufactured by 10 different companies, including Inland, Winchester, Saginaw, Rockola, Quality Hardware, National Postal Meter, Standard Products, Underwood Typewriter, IBM, and Commercial Controls Corporation. But the M101 remained exclusively an Inland product. The reasons were partly logistical. The folding stock required specialized subcontractors already integrated into Inland's supply chain, and partly temporal. The weapon was approved in May 1942 and first delivered in October 1942, a 6-month turnaround that left no time to establish additional production lines. By the time other manufacturers could have tooled up for M101 production, Inland was already delivering functional weapons to combat units. This single manufacturer approach had advantages that became apparent in quality control. The M1A1 stocks were made in far fewer numbers, with far fewer variations during a shorter period than standard M1 Carbine stocks. Inland maintained consistent tolerances across all 140,000 units. When an armorer in the field examined an M1A1, they knew exactly what they were getting. No variation between manufacturers. No compatibility issues between components made by different contractors. One company, one design, one standard. The contrast with the M1 Garand clarified what the M1A1 had actually accomplished. The Garand weighed 9.5 pounds, nearly twice the M101's 5.2 pounds. The Garand measured 43.6 inches long, almost 19 inches longer than the M1A1 when folded. The Garand fired .30-06 Springfield with devastating power at 500 yards. The M1A1 fired .30 Carbine, effective to 300 yards. On paper, the Garand was the superior weapon. More power, more range, more stopping power. General Patton had called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, and for general infantry combat, he was right. But for paratroopers jumping at 120 miles per hour with 88 pounds of equipment, the Garand's superiority became a liability. More power meant more weight. More range meant more length. The Garand's strengths were irrelevant to the paratroopers' mission profile. The M101 was not trying to match the Garand's capabilities. It was solving a different problem entirely. For soldiers who needed to carry a weapon during a violent parachute exit, survive a combat landing, and fight within seconds, the M101 delivered exactly what was required. Adequate firepower in a package roughly half the Garand's weight and, when folded, 41% shorter. This was the fundamental insight that Inland's automotive engineers had understood from the beginning. The best weapon for a specific mission was not necessarily the most powerful weapon, or the most accurate weapon, or the longest-ranged weapon. The best weapon was the one that actually worked for the conditions under which it would be used. Paratroopers did not need to engage targets at 500 yards. They needed to survive the first 60 seconds after landing. The M101 was optimized for that mission, and nothing else mattered. Limited numbers of M1A1 Carbines were also issued to the United States Marine Corps 1st Parachute Regiment, although Marine paratroopers were never deployed in combat via airdrop. The Marines eventually disbanded their parachute units and reassigned the personnel to regular infantry formations, but the weapons remained in service. After World War II, M101 Carbines were supplied to American allies under military assistance programs. French paratroopers carried them in Indochina during the First Indochina War, including at the defense of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Some saw continued action during the Vietnam War with both American Special Operations Forces and South Vietnamese allies who valued the compact design for jungle warfare. The folding stock concept proved so practical that Inland engineers developed additional variants. In May 1944, they created the T4 conversion kit, which added selective fire capability to the M1 Carbine platform. This became the basis for the M2 Carbine, capable of both semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. While the M2 used a standard wooden stock in most configurations, the folding stock version, the M2A1, combined the compact airborne package with sustained automatic fire, creating a weapon that resembled a modern submachine gun in capability and handling. By late 1944, the M101 had become the standard weapon for American airborne forces. It had proven itself in Sicily, Normandy, southern France, and numerous smaller operations. Production efficiency had reached its peak. Quality remained consistent. The supply chain from SE Overton and the Inland Assembly Line to airborne units in Europe and the Pacific functioned smoothly. Everything was working exactly as Army Ordnance had hoped when they first requested a folding stock carbine in early 1942. The weapon had evolved from an urgent requirement to a proven combat system in less than 3 years. From Inland's first patent application on August 5, 1942, through Sicily, through D-Day, through Market Garden and Operation Varsity, the M101 had demonstrated that simplicity executed flawlessly beat sophistication that might fail. 140,591 weapons, everyone manufactured to the same standard, everyone carrying the same spring-loaded cam design that required no locks, no complex mechanisms, nothing that could fail when a paratrooper needed it most. The legacy was already being written in the fields of Normandy and the forests of Belgium. The M101 had not replaced the M1 Garand. It had never tried to. It had simply solved the specific problem it was designed to solve, giving paratroopers a weapon that worked the second they hit the ground. September 1944. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history up to that point. American, British, and Polish airborne units dropped into the Netherlands in a bold attempt to capture bridges across the Rhine and end the war by Christmas. American paratroopers jumped with M101 carbines, carrying the same weapons that had proven themselves in Normandy 3 months earlier. The operation failed strategically. Allied intelligence had somehow missed 2 SS Panzer divisions refitting near Arnhem. The famous assessment, a bridge too far, captured the overreach. The plan assumed speed and surprise could overcome German defensive strength. It assumed the bridges could be captured before German reinforcements arrived. It assumed wrong. But tactically, at the level where individual soldiers fought and died, the M101 performed exactly as designed. Paratroopers landed with functional weapons. They established defensive positions immediately. They fought outnumbered and outgunned by German armored units, but they were never unarmed. They were never fumbling with disassembled components while tanks approached. The problem was not the weapon. The problem was the plan. One limitation did emerge during extended combat operations, though it had been understood from the beginning. The folding metal stock of the M1A1 was not well suited for launching rifle grenades. The M1 Garand solid wooden stock could absorb the heavy recoil of a grenade launch without damage. The M1A1's wire stock, optimized for weight and compactness, could bend or break under that same stress. Army regulations acknowledged this reality. The M1A1 was not to be used for grenade launching except in emergencies, and even then, the recommended procedure was to fold the stock and place the pistol grip firmly on the ground, using the earth itself to absorb the recoil rather than the folding mechanism. This was not a design flaw. It was a design choice. Inland's engineers had faced a fundamental trade-off. They could build a folding stock strong enough to handle grenade launches, but it would require heavier gauge wire, additional reinforcement, and more complex construction, all of which would increase weight, reduce reliability, and slow production. Or they could optimize for the primary mission, giving paratroopers a compact, lightweight weapon that deployed instantly and fired reliably. They chose the latter. For the actual combat conditions paratroopers faced, this was the correct choice. The overwhelming majority of engagements occurred at ranges under 200 yards, in terrain where rifle grenades provided minimal advantage over hand grenades or direct fire. Paratroopers needed weapons that worked the moment they landed. The ability to launch rifle grenades was useful, but not essential. Weight and instant deployment were essential. The mathematical proof was written in blood and survival rates. Paratroopers carrying M1A1 carbines had measurably better outcomes in the critical first minutes after landing compared to earlier operations, where men had carried disassembled Garands. The reduction in casualties was impossible to quantify precisely. Too many variables affected survival in combat, but veteran paratroopers and their officers consistently reported that the M1A1 gave them a fighting chance when scattered drops left them isolated and surrounded. The weapon's legacy was being established not through dramatic technological innovation, but through relentless, boring reliability. 140,591 M1A1 carbines had been produced. Everyone featured the same spring-loaded cam. Everyone used automotive brake shoe rivets. Everyone was built by workers who had learned their trades making car parts, not rifles. And everyone worked. This represented a broader lesson about weapons development during World War II. The most successful weapons were not always the most sophisticated. The M101 succeeded because it did exactly what was needed, when it was needed, every time. Nothing more, nothing less. Inland's engineers had resisted the temptation to add features, improve performance beyond mission requirements, or demonstrate technical virtuosity. They had built a tool, not a showcase. The production numbers told their own story. Inland Manufacturing Division had produced 2.6 million total M1 carbines during the war, 43% of all M1 carbines manufactured. The M1A1 represented just 5% of Inland's total carbine production, but that 5%, 140,591 units, equipped the entirety of American airborne forces for the remainder of the war. The timeline was equally telling. Design approved May 12, 1942. First deliveries October 1942. Combat debut Sicily, July 1943. Normandy, June 19, 44. Market Garden, September 1944. Operation Varsity, March 1945. From concept to combat deployment in 12 months. From first delivery to decisive validation on D-Day in 20 months. This was not the pace of peacetime weapons development, where programs stretched across decades. This was wartime urgency translated into functional hardware. On August 5, 1942, Inland submitted a patent application for the M101 folding stock design. Patent number 2,405,758 was granted August 13, 1946, nearly a year after the war ended. By then, the patent meant nothing. The design had already proven itself in the only laboratory that mattered: combat. The M101 carbine saved lives not because it was the most powerful weapon American industry could produce. It saved lives not because it represented cutting-edge technology or revolutionary innovation. It saved lives because it solved the right problem in the simplest possible way. A paratrooper needed a weapon that worked the second their boots hit the ground. Inland's engineers, automotive specialists who had spent 20 years making steering wheels before being thrust into weapons production, understood something the traditional arms manufacturers had missed. In war, complexity kills. Complexity means more parts that can break, more steps that can be forgotten under stress, more seconds lost while the enemy closes distance. Simplicity survives. Simplicity means a spring-loaded cam instead of a lock mechanism. Simplicity means automotive rivets instead of custom fasteners. Simplicity means 140,591 weapons, everyone built to the same standard, everyone working exactly the same way. The best design is not the one that does everything. The best design is the one that does exactly what is needed, when it is needed, every time, nothing more, nothing less. The M101 Carbine embodied that principle, and thousands of American paratroopers came home because Inland's engineers understood that simple truth better than anyone else.